So when it comes to quitting porn, I've made the case that the spiritual component of this process is the most important. But what about the science? Do you really need to know what's happening neurochemically in your brain in order to quit porn? Well, for me and many other guys who have gotten clean, this scientific knowledge has been absolutely essential. Why? Well, because it gives you much more insight into understanding what's happening inside of you with a porn habit, what happens when you try to quit, and what you stand to gain from the whole process. Now, if all you want to learn is the science, the hard, facts and things like that, the studies, you can view this video on markweppet.com, where I've listed a ton of resources laying everything out. And later in this video, I'm going to be talking through some of the specific science concepts I found the most useful. But I'm not a scientist, so I'll leave the heavy lifting on the scientific nitty-gritty to people who are much more qualified than I am. But what I can comment on, though, is how you can use this science to help heal your brain from porn addiction. Through coaching guys for over 10 years in this, I know exactly where the science can be used to modify your behaviors and your thought processes so that this journey becomes much easier for you. So to that end, I'm going to be telling you a little bit about my own story with all this porn quitting stuff and the science to illustrate some very important points. So to do this, let's turn the clock way back here for a moment, okay? Let's go back to when I was a sophomore in high school. At that time, I felt inspired to take the Catholic faith of my upbringing more seriously. So during Lent one year, I tried to stop using porn and stop masturbating. And by this point, in high school, these activities were already habits that I had been practicing for years. And at first, it went pretty good despite some cravings. It wasn't exactly easy, but I quickly built up a streak and kept my Lenten goal. However, as I started to reach the 1 month mark, things began to really change for me. I began getting very irritable. I started feeling depressed. I started feeling anxious. I didn't want to do anything at all, and I just felt like I had no pleasure in my life. During this period, I basically felt miserable, and I had no idea what was going on. And along with this, my cravings for porn spiked dramatically. And this had some pretty significant side effects. It felt like my whole system was out of whack, and I just didn't know what to do. Ultimately, I couldn't take the discomfort any longer, and I relapsed. Okay, I used some porn, I masturbated, and guess what happened? Well, immediately, all of those negative symptoms went away. In fact, I felt so much better. I remember literally laughing out loud at how much better I felt. And at that moment, I came to a few faulty conclusions that would cause me a tremendous amount of pain in the future. The first thing I concluded was that clearly my body needed porn. Okay, it's like this kind of sexual release was essential for me to feel okay. And the second thing was that it led me to label the church and anyone who told me otherwise about porn, who told me porn was bad, that those people were wrong. Basically, I came to view the Christian understanding of sex as fundamentally flawed. You're telling me that I'm supposed to wait a decade or more after puberty to get married and actually have sex? My own body just showed me the consequences of going for 30 days without release. Clearly, I wasn't designed for that. And if my religion was wrong about that, well then, what else was it wrong about? Right? Because that's a pretty big thing. If you screw up sex, well, can I trust you to handle anything else? And in fact, this experience ended up being a turning point where I basically stopped trying to follow any sort of chastity. And eventually, this internal schism about sex led me to completely reject Christianity during college. And from this stemmed a lot of bad decisions that led me to some extremely dark places and painful times. So at this point, you might be wondering, okay, that's interesting, Mark, but what the heck does this have to do with the science of how porn affects the brain? Well, honestly, it has everything to do with it, but it didn't really click in for me until later. So we're going to fast forward now, okay, to 2013. All right, at this time, I was fresh out of college, and I had actually just quit a software engineering job to try and become a life coach. I had a passion for self-development ever since I started reading self-help books when I was 14, and I wanted to make it my career, okay? But the problem was I just couldn't focus. Trying to build a business was nothing like anything I'd experienced with school or the workforce. Instead of having, some teacher or boss telling me what to do, it was all on me to figure out what's supposed to happen and hold myself accountable. But with all of this new stress and uncertainty, I found myself completely unable to focus. I'd be able to work maybe 45 minutes, then I would get overwhelmed, and then I would use some porn to reset myself. But then after using porn, I'd feel so lethargic and crappy that all I could get myself to do was play video games and screw around until the evening. I'd then usually have to use porn again to calm myself down to go to sleep after being so frustrated with myself for wasting another day. This pattern repeated, and believe me, I tried to stop it, okay? I tried to get focused, but no matter what I did, I kept ruining my days with porn and other stupid escapism. And this was particularly frustrating because I considered myself incredibly well-versed in self-improvement, right? I was trying to become a life coach, right? I tried self-talk, I tried affirmations, I tried meditation, I tried all the productivity hacks that I knew of, but nothing worked. And I'd get so mad at myself for, not just my failure to be able to be productive, but just like the fact that I was so hooked on this thing. I mean, I kind of stepped away from, my morals on chastity and whatnot, but I didn't think porn was good. It never really felt right in my heart. And it just got me angry and filled with self-loathing. I remember sometimes I would just stare at myself in the mirror and cuss myself out and be like, what the heck is wrong with you? Now, at the time all of this was going on, I was living with my college girlfriend at her parents' house, which was very far from my home and family. And I loved her. I wanted to marry her. And her parents were amazing for letting me stay there as I tried to establish myself and build this business. So, naturally, I did everything in my power to hide my situation from them. I'd be sitting at the dinner table and lying to them, telling them that things were going great. I was going through my life coaching certification, but I was pretending like I was making fantastic progress, building my business and doing all this other stuff. But in reality, I was mostly just jerking off and playing video games while hating myself. But I was good at hiding it, okay? I even had a system. You see, my desk was set up in the room so that if you opened the door to the, my bedroom/office, you'd be able to see what was on my computer screen. So anytime I was using porn, I'd always have, a separate browser open with some work stuff on it so I could quickly alt-tab to it. And I'd only ever wear one headphone in so I could hear, someone coming. Heck, I even had a little rear view mirror sitting on my desk so I could see if anyone opened the door behind me. And looking back on all this, it's pitiful and kind of funny, but that was the life I was living. I was living this double life of secrecy. But despite my precautions, I remember one time where my girlfriend almost caught me in the act. And luckily at the last second, I was able to, switch the screen and cover myself up real quick, but it was way too close. And I remember this instance, it hit me really deep because it just became clear that if she saw what I was doing, if she knew that I had been lying about porn and the state of my work, we'd be done, right? I would lose everything I was aiming for at that time, and I would be forced to probably slink back home, live in my parents' basement, and basically be a failure in my own eyes. And this event really rocked me, it just filled me with such frustration and helplessness that it drove me to later that night just fall on my knees and for the first time in years, pray to God for just some help. Just please, I'm screwed here. Help me out, God, please. And thankfully, I believe God heard my prayer because the next day I stumbled onto an odd little subreddit called r/nofap, which was dedicated to helping guys quit porn. I had never seen something like that before. And in the info section, they referenced a video by the late great Gary Wilson, a teacher who ran a website called Your Brain on Porn. And in this video, Gary broke down the science behind how porn was addictive and created serious brain changes in those who regularly used it. He explained how it affected you similarly to other drugs like cocaine, releasing huge amounts of dopamine, which led to a cascade of negative changes when abused over time. And so after watching this video, it was like a giant puzzle piece snapped into place, and all of a sudden, so many of my experiences started to make sense to me. So let's start with the first big insight, okay? Remember back when I was a teenager and I tried to stay abstinent during Lent, but ended up relapsing because I felt so crappy. Well, I thought my body was telling me at that point that I needed porn to be okay. What I realized after looking at the science, though, wasn't that I needed porn, but that I was actually going through a neurochemical withdrawal. I was an addict, right? I had built an addiction, and my mind and body were struggling because they weren't getting their expected drug. And this changed everything for me for three big reasons. First, it allowed me to view the discomfort of quitting porn not as a bad thing, but as like the addiction leaving my body, as a sign that actually not something bad is occurring, but something good is happening. Secondly, it let me know that these feelings weren't just what a life without porn or masturbation felt like, and they were a temporary phase. And then finally, especially after reading all of the success stories they had, it let me know that I'd actually feel way better on the other side once I kicked my porn habit. So instead of feeling like I was fighting an unwinnable and infinite battle against my own masculine sex drive, it shifted my perspective to see it as a temporary process of healing a dysfunctional addiction inside of me. And this leads me to the next big insight I got from the science, was that it explained how unnatural and poisonous porn was, particularly to the male brain. Basically, porn simulates something that would never exist in nature. Okay, like with porn, you can expose your brain to more potential mates in 5 minutes than our hunter-gatherer ancestors would have seen in their entire lifetimes. Okay, like literally just 5 minutes of scrolling, thumbnails on porn or whatever, like your brain, it's seeing all those attractive ladies as potential mates. Like that is an overload of our system. Put simply, our brain isn't designed to have any natural ability to navigate an ocean of infinite sexual novelty. And this is particularly because of something called the Coolidge effect, where the male brain responds to sexual novelty extremely strongly by releasing a ton of dopamine. This is why you can use porn at such a high frequency without ever getting sick of it. At the press of a button, you can trigger an immense flow of instant and intense pleasure. This ability to always find something new and stimulating makes the behavior wildly abusable. The fact we weren't designed for this kind of sexual novelty is exactly why it's so hard to quit. Our natural biological processes aren't adapted to this kind of stimulus. Before understanding all of this, I thought I was just some kind of broken weirdo with no self-control. But once I understood what I was up against, it only made sense that I struggled with porn. I stopped expecting myself to just grow out of it because I realized that's not really possible. The only way forward was to very intentionally build up a mindset and lifestyle that fortified the weak points of my natural biological inclinations. And further, and perhaps more importantly, this understanding actually allowed me to feel some compassion for myself. Instead of just berating myself for being weak, I shifted into a mindset of healing toward myself, which made, honestly, a huge difference. Now, the next big insight that came from the science was how all of this instant pleasure came with serious baggage. Because in biology, there is always a cost to things. When you constantly bombard yourself with narcotic levels of dopamine, your brain, it's going to change, okay? And we call the nature of the brain's ability to change neuroplasticity. And the changes brought about by porn are not positive ones. Surprise, surprise. And in my opinion, the three biggest negative brain changes are hypofrontality, delta phos B buildup, and sexual dysfunction. So let's break all of these down one by one. We'll start with that fancy word of hypofrontality, okay? If you break the word down, hypo means less than normal, and frontality, well, refers actually to the prefrontal cortex, okay? Which is like the executive center of the brain that helps you delay gratification, weigh consequences, and resist urges. Basically, being a porn user, it reduces activity in this executive center of your brain, like here in the front. And as a result of this decreased activity, this hypofrontality seriously damages your discipline, your ability to focus, your decision making, your emotional regulation, and your ability to resist other addictive activities as well. Put simply, when you nuke your brain with easy pleasure, your brain has a harder time getting hooked into more natural pleasures. So things like doing good work, connecting with people, exercise, time in nature, sleep, self-care, all of these good things stop feeling good. Think of it like this, all right? Imagine being hungry for a good home-cooked dinner after a long day of work, okay? Some like steak, potatoes, and some veggies. Delicious and nutritious. And normally you'd want to dig into something like that. But imagine if right before you sat down at the table, you ate 5 donuts, okay? How appealing would that home-cooked dinner seem after eating those 5 donuts? Well, it seemed way less interesting. You might even have a stomach ache. Further, all that sugar would lead to eventually an energy crash and probably make you feel more irritable, moody, and crappy. Porn is a similar sort of thing. It's almost like neurological junk food, but for life in general, because When every experience is compared to the unnaturally high pleasure spike of porn, everything else starts to seem kind of gray and unappealing in turn. When I started wrapping my head around this concept, it finally helped me understand that my porn problem was also the main driver of my productivity, focus, and emotional issues. Looking back, of course I couldn't focus on building my business. Of course I felt like crap. I was just blasting my brain all day with cheap pleasure, and I was destroying my natural appetite for progress. The only thing I could run off of was pure fear and stress, which is frankly not a good fuel source, and it just drains you even more. And this brings us to our next important brain change triggered by repeated porn use: the buildup of the protein called delta phos B. And unlike normal brain chemicals that typically fade very quickly, delta phos B lingers for weeks or even months, acting like a memory of addiction. It'll make porn cues feel hyper rewarding, meaning like porn feels even better and exciting to you. It makes normal life feel dull by comparison, which we've kind of already talked about, which is called desensitization. It locks in the habit, pushing you toward compulsive repetition, and it fuels unpleasant cravings because it amplifies the wanting sensation. And it can make you want it even if the actual liking and pleasure is decreasing and disappearing. It creates that restless, unsatisfied itch. If you're using porn heavily, you probably aren't even enjoying it that much anymore, but that doesn't stop you from craving it with like all of your being at certain points. A good analogy is to think of delta phos B kind of like wet cement for habits. Each porn session leaves a footprint that gradually hardens into a groove, making it much easier to repeat the pattern and much harder to walk away from. Now, this might sound scary, but it's actually all fixable, and we're going to talk about that more in a moment. But there's something very powerful in understanding the role of this brain protein. Prior to understanding delta phos B, I thought that a life without porn was just a life with way more pain. I didn't realize that my addict brain's attitude toward porn was not actually representative of my true sexuality. My feelings and cravings for porn were inflated by this addictive mechanism and not who I really was. This allowed me to start seeing cravings as little liars, little things trying to sell me something that wasn't actually true, which was incredibly useful when it came to overcoming cravings. This understanding also helped me combat the rationalization of one more time won't hurt. And this is because one of the main goals in getting clean is to break down that concrete path of delta phos B. But the only way to do that is if you stop feeding the pathway, if you stop pouring more concrete on it. And every single time that you use, you're just kind of undoing everything that you've worked so hard to accomplish so far. So yeah, it might feel like, oh, just one time doesn't hurt. No, that's undoing potentially, days, weeks, maybe even months of work that you've put in. And this brings me to the last big brain change that I want to look at here that's caused by porn use, and that is sexual dysfunction. Basically, porn conditions your brain to think that sex is something that happens with a screen and your hand, not a partner. So when a porn addict is with a flesh and blood partner, things don't always work right. And the most pervasive form of this is erectile dysfunction. Prior to 1990, only 1 to 2% of men under 40 suffered from erectile dysfunction. Today, studies show that 20 to 35% of men under 40 suffer from ED. So going from 2% in the late 80s to 30% today, that's roughly a 10 to 15 times increase in young male erectile dysfunction in just 3 decades. And what happened during that time? The internet, right? Millions of guys now in their sexual prime need to pop a pill just to stay hard during sex. But it doesn't stop there. Guys also report issues with delayed ejaculation, lack of desire for real sex, a disconnect between sex and emotion, and the escalation of troubling fetishes. And that one there can do a real number on people, with guys getting hooked on all kinds of stuff completely at odds with their natural sexuality. Basically, when you just keep clicking and trying to wring some more dopamine out of your tired and calloused brain, it can lead you to watching kinds of porn that in no way represent your authentic attractions. All of these forms of dysfunction can lead to serious confusion, self-loathing, and obviously can also contribute to massive romantic issues where you either avoid women altogether or your relationship is constantly disrupted by these dysfunctions. And in learning all of this, it just drove home so clearly how the cost of continued porn use was completely unacceptable to me. Luckily, the science wasn't just bad news. It also offered me my path forward. You see, while porn could create bad changes in the brain, I also learned that the neuroplastic nature of our brains offered the ability to fix these issues. And the standard procedure offered was to complete a porn reboot. The idea was that if you stopped using porn for a period of time, your brain would revert to its factory settings where you could have a more natural and normal relationship to your sexuality. In other words, the delta phos B would break down, the prefrontal cortex would come back online, and sexual dysfunction would clear if you just stayed the course and completed the reboot. So armed with this newfound science, the support of the early nofap community, my self-development knowledge, and a reversion in my faith where I came back to God, I managed to quit porn. And my productivity skyrocketed, and I got my life back. Further, I started making videos about my process. I became one of the very first guys to talk about quitting porn from the first person perspective. I built my coaching business, and I helped other guys start to get clean too. My YouTube channel took off, my business took off, but most importantly, after a year and a half of total abstinence and rebooting my brain, my girlfriend became my wife, and we're able to set off on life together without porn being between us. Here I am over a decade later, still clean, still married. I have a beautiful daughter, and I'm more fit, productive, and happy than ever. I've helped so many guys quit porn, and now I want this same result for you. In fact, I want this for every guy. You can quit porn, and you can level up in life. So for the next steps, here's what you can do. You can click the link below and you can view this post on markquepit.com. If you want to delve deep into the science, I'll have a bunch of resources listed. But while you're there, you'll also want to sign up for a free subscription. This will give you access to the exercises for this lesson, unlock additional free content, and it'll keep you informed of every new lesson posted. So that's it for this video. I hope you found it useful, and I'll see you in the next one. Ooh, yeah.